All right, can you guys hear me? Oh my God. I think we're okay. I think we're online. All right, it's all coming from the wrong place. Wait a minute. Oh, we got the wrong mics, the wrong everything, audio. Okay, can you hear me now? Vocal now. All right. Sorry, guys. Just had an emergency. Had to run my wife over to a urgent care. Nothing. Everything's fine. But and made it up. And of course, we're in a different setting because, as you can see, I am back in California. Those of you can see me. I'm back in California. So I apologize for the glitch in the beginning there. One piece of software basically failed, and anyway, we're here. So good to see everybody. I'm in California. Sorry I didn't do a show yesterday, but I was jet lagged. I guess the 4 hours difference between Puerto Rico and California make a difference. So I skipped the show yesterday, given how tired I actually was. So today we're going to talk about two topics. I want to just talk a little bit about a thought I had about tribalism. It kind of hit me a few days ago, and I thought that would be interesting. And then I want to talk about China a little bit, and then of course we've got super chats. So happy to take any questions on the super chat that you guys might have. So feel free to use that feature if you're on Facebook or you're in another platform and you're interested in asking questions. The best way to ask questions is by coming over to YouTube and using the super chat feature. Tomorrow, we'll have a show on, not tomorrow. We might have a show tomorrow, but certainly on Tuesday, we've got a show on Pride. This will be the final episode of the show on morality and the application of morality to life and business, which should be a great show. Should be a lot of fun. So I'm hoping you guys have a chance to join us on Tuesday to talk about Pride. And as you know, there'll be two matches. I think I've said this before. There'll be two matches on the show Pride. One will be $1,000 dollar for dollar match. The other one will be if we get to 250 likes on the show, then we'll get another $1,000. So a great opportunity to help support the Huron Book Show. So join us on Tuesday. It'll probably be 4 p.m. Pacific time, either 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. Pacific time, so 7 or 8 p.m. Eastern time. Luke, thank you. That's terrific. Thank you. Really appreciate the support. So I did a debate, kind of a debate discussion with Toby Young of the Free Speech Union in the UK the other day, and he is a supporter of not exactly clear what, but some kind of government intervention in with big tech with regard to free speech, and he considers what they do censorship. And he also talked about other laws he'd like to see passed and regulations and laws that he would like to see passed. And we're having this discussion, and as we talked about this, and he was articulating why he held that position. I had this thought about tribalism that I think is important, and I think explains a lot of what I'm seeing in the world that I didn't really understand until now. And that is, Toby's perspective was that pretty much anything was okay. That he was willing to compromise, if you will, on principles, if it stopped the left, if his team would win as a consequence. And it just the way he said it and the way he expressed himself, I found really intriguing. So I'd always thought, naive me, right? I'd always thought that people who are conservatives have a certain set of beliefs, and they believe in those things, and that they sometimes compromise on those things, and they sometimes don't get everything they want, and sometimes they don't understand the implications of everything that they hold, and so on. But fundamentally, I thought, they have a set of beliefs, and that is what motivates them, that set of beliefs. And they won't purposefully go against that set of beliefs. Right? That the core was this belief set, even if it's ambiguous and not well defined and not very solid, but they wouldn't explicitly go against it. Right? And the same on the left. That people on the left have a certain set of beliefs, a certain set of ideas, and that's what motivates them. That's what motivates them to be of the left. That's what motivates them to support certain pieces of legislature and reject other pieces of legislature. It's basically this orientation around ideas, I guess, because that's how I am, and I project that, right? So I have a certain set of ideas. That's what I want to get achieved, and that's what I fight for. And, if I was in politics, I'd be willing to compromise on the way there in order to get where I want to go. But generally, it'd be the signpost, the direction will all be driven by these ideas, by these principles, by these ideals that I'm going for. And my assumption was, implicitly, that that's what people on the left and on the right also do. And that even though they're inconsistent and even though their ideas, again, are not well formed, that their motivation is all driven by ideas. And what hit me when Toby was saying was that, there's a certain set of ideas very vaguely represented that identify somebody as left and right. But it seems that more and more people today, in how they apply to the specifics, are not so much using the ideas as a reference point, but they're using the impact on the other guys as the reference point. And of course, this has been obvious over the last few years, where I've seen more, and this has been shocking to me, and I still don't quite understand it, but it's taken me a long, long time to understand it. People would say things like, yeah, that's bad, but it'll stop the left, so I'm for it. So the standard becomes, what will stop the other team, the other group, the other tribe in this case? Not what is consistent with our ideas, not what will get me to where I want to go, but purely it will hurt the other guys. That's the motivation. That's the incentive. And that is really hard for me to grasp. It's really hard for me to grasp. But it's obviously true, and you can see that in many people who support Trump. It's not about this'll get me a positive. It's this'll slow them down, or this'll hurt them, or this'll. So, for example, on the issue of big tech, on the issue of Facebook and Twitter and all of those, there is no free speech argument to regulate speech on Twitter, Facebook, because they are private companies, private platforms, and regulating them would be a violation of free speech. Their speech, right? Their ability to discriminate. So it's not about that. It's not about defending speech. It's not about issues of speech. It's about power. It's about power to restrain what people are afraid of, which is the advance of the left. It's about power to hold the left back, to control the left. It's about power over these companies, to be able to use them to promote your ideas over other ideas. It has nothing to do with the principle, which is the right supposedly stands for free speech against the left. It stands against free speech. And indeed, the left, when the left argues, right, that what the left wants is power to control speech. What the left wants is power to control your speech. They're not, but they can't say that they're against free speech because explicitly they're the party, historically, that has been pro-free speech. So they have to invent an excuse to justify the power grab. And the excuse is, we don't want to offend, and people have a right not to be offended, and people have a right not to, feel bad because of your speech, and speech can hurt, so speech is violence. They know this is crap. This is self-evidently the opposite of free speech. But they can't admit, probably even to themselves, that they're actually anti-free speech and they want power over speech. They want to control speech. So they need to create these excuses. So all of this is about power and about the other guys. And of course, that's what power is. What's power? It's power over people and power to hold back the other tribe. It's my tribe over your tribe. My tribe controlling, having power, or your tribe controlling, having power. And it's the same as, we're for free trade until power demands that we have tariffs. If, in order to maintain power, we have to protect steelworkers and we have to pretend to protect the working class and we have to pretend to protect all these other places, then principles go out, power dominates. Power and holding back the other team. Power and restraining the opposition. The primary is my group having power, my group being in control, my group dominating over your group, over the other group. So I think in my mind now, it's clear that for so many people out there in the culture, they've picked a team and they're willing to do anything for that team. And you can see it right now where people who I think normally are basic, decent, okay people are, willing to abandon reason, abandon evidence, abandon standards of evidence so that their team can win. So Maradona, when he played soccer, Maradona died last week, maybe one of the top 5 soccer players in all of history, just a phenomenal soccer player. What he could do with the ball, it was just stunning and amazing. But if he needed to use his hand, as he called it, the hand of God, in order to score a goal, then he used the hand. And none of his fans, none of his team, nobody who supported Argentina in the World Cup bemoaned the fact that he used his hand to score a goal, even though the evidence is quite clear. There's video evidence. So, if it's your team cheating, then it's okay. So, if we have to pretend there was election fraud so that we can win and we can maintain power and we can control, then so be it. Generally, I don't believe in cheating. Generally, I don't believe in lying. Generally, I believe in the American political system, and I'm very pro-Constitution. But because my team lost, to hell with all that. I don't know if you saw General Flynn the other day, his tweet about Donald Trump should suspend the Constitution and declare martial law. This is Flynn. This is the guy who was supposed to be the national security advisor to Trump. It was for a very short period of time. I actually met Flynn a few months before the election in 2016. And a smart guy, right? Had good, proper views on Iran. I didn't like him completely, but he was good. Normal, pro-Constitution, pro-American. But the tribalism over the last, I don't know, maybe it's 10 years, but particularly over the last 4, is such that truth doesn't matter, reality doesn't matter, principles don't matter. What matters is that the team that you're backing wins. And they'll do anything, just like, in a sense, just like the soccer who, some of those crazy soccer fans. They go into stands and yell and scream and fight and I mean, I'm sure in their normal lives are pretty normal and nice guys and everything. But once they've picked the team, once they've chosen which team is theirs, reason is completely out the window. Rationality is completely out. And they become these, little monsters who are willing to commit violence for the team. And the same is true on the left. It doesn't matter what Obama did or didn't do. I mean, it doesn't matter what AOC says or what Antifa. Antifa is just a myth. And it doesn't matter how much evidence, because they know that if Antifa is real, it's harder for them to get elected. It's not that they like Antifa. It's that Antifa hurts the team. So they're anti-Antifa because it hurts the team. I mean, they deny that Antifa exists because it hurts the team, if they do exist, if they are doing what they're doing. And to hell with the evidence. These are people who, in their day-to-day lives and their jobs, are very dedicated to evidence. But when it comes to politics, it's like team sports, but with much more emotion and with much more commitment. And the stakes are a gazillion times higher. If the stakes in sports are non-existent, really, other than your emotional state at the time, in politics, the stakes are massive. The lives of people, the livelihood of people, as we can see right now with COVID, is at stake. So, I mean, I should have known this, and I did know it at some level, but it really is completely irrational. It really is all about their team, their tribe. It really is tribalism. I mean, it still doesn't quite compute. I can't quite grasp it because, I mean, to me, it's so irrational that it just doesn't sit right. But, when Toby said, and I like Toby, and he's a smart guy, and he does some really good work. But when he said something like, we want to pass a law that does X, Y, Z, and yes, I know it's not purist. If you're a purist, you'd be attentive about it. But he said, but it'll slow down the left. And it was like, whoa, wait a minute. That's the standard? Not what is good, what is right, what is true, but it'll slow down the left, even if it's a violation of your principles? And maybe the perception is it's life or death. And if we don't slow down the left, we all die. So we have to slow down the left, and we'll deal with principles later. But no, I don't think it's that. I really do think it's because I think this is not this left. And I wonder. So this is the question I have, and I don't have an answer to it. Has this always been the case? Have politics always been this tribal? Did Republicans always support their president no matter what? The Democrats always support their party no matter what? No matter what they did, what they said, what was happening? I don't know. Some people tell me it's always been like this. I never saw it. I mean, to me, it's a new phenomenon. To me, it's a phenomenon that became real during the Trump era, but looking back was there during Obama, but I don't remember it before that. I remember people being very loyal to Bush, but it wasn't the same thing. There was more credibility to the idea that they were making a mistake rather than this blind loyalty that I think so many out there have towards their political party, towards their political leadership. And again, both parties. Anyway, just a thought on tribalism. And remember, what tribalism really means is, in the context of politics specifically, is power. It's about me having power over the rest of you. It's about my group having power. It's not about even me having power, but my group having power and preventing you from having power. It's my group versus your group, my team versus your team. And anything goes because it's politics. Anything goes. Because, again, politics is about force. Politics is about coercion. Politics is all power. So if I have to use force coercion, then so be it. Even if I know deep down that it goes against my principles, even if I know deep down that it isn't, I say I'm for free speech, but it really isn't for free speech. It really undercuts free speech, but it slows you down. So it's okay. Slows them down, their team down, their tribe down. So it really is unprincipled tribalism. So I think that Toby, like somebody like Toby, wants to be principled. He has an idea of principles, but the principles don't seem to get him where he wants to go, which is the defeat of the left, is the primary. And that's when he becomes a pragmatist. He abandons the principles in the name of defeating them, in the name of my tribe over their tribe. And I think that's true of a lot of people. I think that's true of the Tea Party. The Tea Party seemed to have principles in the early 2000s. They seemed to stand in the early 20-teens. And they seemed to stand for something, and they seemed to have certain beliefs. But they didn't, quote, work. It didn't get them the result they wanted. They couldn't defeat Obama. That was the big thing with the Tea Party. They defeated Obama in 2010 and in 2014 in the House and the Senate, but they couldn't defeat him as president in 2012. And they were sure they would win the 2012 election. He was so unpopular because of Obamacare that it seemed like it would be a slam dunk. And they had principle, quote, on their side. Now, they elected a nominee who was very unprincipled, which is Romney. But of the choices they had, they were all pretty unprincipled. But they lost. And what they did when they lost was they gave up on the principle. And they said, okay, well, principles don't work. What we really need, we need to stop these Obama people. We need to stop the Democrats. We need to halt this. We need to, and I think since then, they've become more and more and more tribal, more and more focused on being against the left than for anything. And I think they've abandoned all the principles. And they're not for anything. They're for a vague notion of America. And that's why Trump's was brilliant in coming up with Make America Great Again. Because he identified that what unified these people was a certain sense of patriotism without a real fundamental principled substance behind it. And that patriotism was what drove them. And he captured that with Make America Great Again. There was also a sense with all these people, with the Tea Party, of nostalgia. So Make America Great Again taps into America and taps into nostalgia and drives you forward. All right, so a thought about tribalism, lack of principle, and power. Remember, that's what it's all about in the end of the day. Because in politics, your team winning means your team has power. All right. Let me just encourage you to do a few things, and then I want to talk about China. Like the show before you leave. We've got a nice live viewership right now. It'd be great if some of you, before you left, just press the like button. Of course, subscribe. If you're not a subscriber, about 25 to 30% of the people who listen to these shows over the next few days are going to be non-subscribers. So please subscribe. That way you'll find out when the show goes live and when I publish short videos, long videos, variety of different videos that go up, or debates, lectures, talks. I put all those things up and accessible to you. By the way, the debate on free speech between me and Toby is up on my channel under debates. So you can find it in debate playlist on free speech. So like the show, it should be at over 100 right now. Don't forget to subscribe, and of course, if you want to support the show, the way to support it is monthly contributions. That is the best way because that's predictable, that's systematic. I know it's coming. and that's at youronbrookshow.com/support, Patreon, Subscribestar, or Locals. Locals, Patreon, Subscribestar, or youronbrookshow.com/support. And of course, you can do so on the Super Chat by asking questions or just making a contribution via the Super Chat as Troy did. So thank you, Troy. That was very, very generous. And of course, Troy is behind the sponsorship of the ethics, the morality, the application of Ayn Rand's ethics to life and business. And he will be doing the match on Tuesday when we do the show on Pride. So that'll be Tuesday at either 7 or 8 p.m. East Coast time. So I'll announce it on the day of, 7 or 8 p.m. East Coast time on Tuesday. I think it's the 8th. Is it the Monday, Tuesday? So it's the 8th of December. And that'll be a show on Pride. And I hope you can all join us live. And we'll be doing some matches. And it should be a lot of fun. All right. Let us see. Good. So let me jump into a quick discussion of a couple of points about the Chinese economy. And then we've got quite a lot of Super Chat questions already. So we'll do the Super Chat. Of course, on the Super Chat questions, the $20 or above questions get priority. The more dollars you put, the higher the priority it is. I think I've got a bunch of $20 questions, so they will get top priority unless somebody comes in with a question at a higher amount. So those will be first, and then we'll try to get through all the questions, all the Super Chat questions ultimately. All right, we're at 100 likes. Thank you guys for liking. So I've come across a number of articles recently about China that I thought were quite interesting and that for change, I think represented some real truth about the Chinese economy. Because I have to admit that most of what I read about China in the press, in all forms of press, not just not just in the mainstream media, but in all different publications and all different discussions of China, what I find is very weak understanding of what happened in China, what's going on in China, and what the future holds for China. There's a real mythology around China that both, unfortunately, the right and the left in the United States are promoting right now. So one aspect of this mythology is that China became rich through what is called, quote, state capitalism. That is where the state has guided industry, where the state has guided the economy towards prosperity, wealth, success, and the elimination of much of the poverty in China. The left is right now, particularly, the Great Reset is very interested in this. The Great Reset, of course, wants to preserve democracy while adopting state control over the means of production, state control over the economy. They want this kind of fascist combination. I've long said China is more fascist than it is communist, in a sense that the government doesn't own the means of production as much as it controls them. So the idea is that this control over the economy, this central planning, pulling levers and pulling pulleys economically, is what has led China to be so successful, is what has led economic growth to be so robust in China. And as a consequence, we in the West should adopt the Chinese method. We in the West should become like China, given how successful China has been with this model. And that is common, both on the left and on the kind of nationalist conservative movement, on the economic nationalist Steve Bannon side of the plate, of the political map. They too believe that China has been successful because of the success of central planning, because of the success of the state at harnessing the productive energies of their people for the sake of the state. And that we in America need to do more of that. We need to centrally plan more. We need to control more. We don't want to give up on private property. We don't want to become socialist. But we need to have much more centrally planned, centrally dictated economic policy. Economic nationalism, they call it. So that's kind of point one that seems to be a prevalent view in the media, on the left, and on certain people on the right. The second myth about China is that China is an economic threat. And there are two aspects of this that I want to talk about. Two aspects of this that are common here. Now, first, I'm not going to talk about military threat. You know, I'm much more sympathetic to the idea that there might be a military threat. I'm not going to talk about them being a threat to property rights or intellectual property rights, stuff like that. I'm just talking about the fact that they are going to become so big economically that two things are going to happen. One, it is going to diminish the United States because the Chinese are going to become so rich. We are not going to be able to keep up, and by not being able to keep up, somehow that will hurt us, that we will be worse off because they are better off. That's point one. And second point is that they're just going to become the dominant political, economic player in the world. And as a consequence, their model will be the model for the future, and their model will be the model to be emulated. And what the left and right worry about there is not their economic model will become the dominant, because they've accepted the Chinese economic model. I mean, we even have accepted a model, like a weak Chinese model for dealing with COVID, right? So we do lockdowns. We don't do Chinese-style lockdowns because, actually Chinese-style lockdowns actually work. We have the worst of both worlds. We violate rights by having lockdowns, and they're completely inefficient because we don't have, we won't literally enforce the lockdowns. So they're both violations of rights and completely ineffective. At least the Chinese, at least. I don't mean at least. So the Chinese are massive violations of rights, much bigger than ours. Wrong to do. But in the context of a COVID, they actually work. So, I think many people in America are adopting Chinese ideas anyway, but it's not the Chinese economic model they're worried about the West adopting. In a sense, they've already acknowledged that we should. What they don't want us to adopt is the Chinese so-called political model, because they both the left and the right claim to be anti-authoritarian. Now, what is wrong with these ideas? And there's a lot wrong with them. Well, first, China did not succeed because of the state. China succeeded in spite of the state. Let me say it again. China succeeded in spite of the state. The Chinese economy could have grown much faster. China could be much richer. Poverty in China could be much lower, if not for the large role the state has played. China's economic success is due dominantly, overwhelmingly, to the role of the private sector, to the extent that they've allowed it to be private and allowed it to be free. So in China, it's still true that state-run businesses are the big businesses. In terms of employment, in terms of size, they dominate the economy. But you look at GDP in China. 60% of GDP comes from the private sector. 70% of innovation comes from the private sector. 80% of employment in the cities comes from the private sector. 90% of exports come from the private sector. So it is those areas where the Chinese government has left them free, has recognized to some extent. Somebody says, you're on to the extent, Brooke. To some extent, Brooke. To some extent, private property. It is there that wealth has been created. It is the exact opposite of what the state capitalist people claim. It is where the central planning has been involved. That's where you get failure. That's where you get waste. That's where you get lack of efficiency, lack of productivity. That's where you get trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars wasted, disappeared, gone on unproductive products. So, all the growth, all the real growth, all the innovation, all the progress, all the success, all the wealth has come in China from those parts of the economy that they have left free. Right? Almost all, a Chinese economist, Zhang Weiying, a good Chinese economist, by the way, says that China's success is not because, and I quote, not because of the state, but in spite of the state, unquote. Now, what the private sector in China has done is truly astounding. In 1980, 88% of the Chinese population, 88% of the Chinese population lived in extreme poverty. Extreme poverty means $2 a day or less. Just stop for a minute and think. What would it mean for you to live on $2 a day or less? And could you? How would that even be possible? Today, the number of people in China who live in extreme poverty is less than 1%. 87% of the population has been born out of extreme poverty. Hundreds of millions of Chinese are now middle class. That's not the Chinese government. That's not state-owned enterprises. That is the private sector to the extent that it is allowed to be private in China. What happened a couple of weeks ago is quite stunning. While there is clear movement in China towards more authoritarianism, and clear movement in China, it seems, although it's so hard to figure out what actually is going on in China, it seems that there is more controls over the economic freedom in China. That is, there's more emphasis on the state-owned. But it's not clear that Chinese are clearly, there's a battle going on within the Chinese Communist Party. Not communist, but still the one-party rule over China. There's a battle going on within the party over whether to go the path of complete dominance, return, really a return to absolute authoritarianism and much more control over the economy and really reining in the private enterprises, the private property, the private wealth that is being created and putting it completely under the control of the government, under the control of the party. That's one side. On the other side, still kind of left over from the days of Deng Xiaoping and the people who came after him, supports even more market liberalization. Indeed, their argument is if we don't market liberalize, if we don't create more wealth, if we don't create more jobs, we will have an uprising in this country. We will have a situation where the people will rise up against us and kick us out. And there's a constant battle between these two forces. And it's hard to tell, sitting here in the West, which one is winning. It certainly seems like, with Xi in power, that the party, that the part that says more controls over the economy is winning. But then this happened. So about, I think it's a week, 2 weeks ago, China signed a free trade deal with 14 other countries in the Asia-Pacific region. I mean, it's a significant deal. This will be the largest free trade bloc in the world. It'll encompass 2.2 billion people. The only big country in Asia that's not part of this is India, and India might join. It's got 1/3 of the world's economic outputs in this one region. 14 countries. It will dramatically reduce tariffs between these countries. It will establish common trade rules and open and connected supply chains. It phases out all kinds of restrictions that the Chinese have today on, competition in financial services and e-commerce and telecommunications, even on intellectual property rights. There is a systemization across these countries, all in a positive free market direction. This is a major, I think those of you who listen to my show frequently know, I'm a huge believer in free trade. I think free trade is massively beneficial to human life. And this trade deal is a massive benefit to the economies of the Asian countries that have signed it, and a massive benefit to the economy of China, and a huge step in the right direction towards greater freedom in China. And it's truly amazing that as the United States and Europe are closing down, are shutting down, have become anti-trade. Even Biden coming in has said, oh, no, I'm not going to eliminate the tariffs in China. No, I'm going to keep everything that Trump did. Indeed, I'm going to be just as tough as Trump is on trade. I always told you that Trump's policies in trade came from the left and were basically took Bernie Sanders' trade policies and adopted them for the right. And Biden's not going to make me happy in trade at all. Biden's not going to be happy, not going to make me happy on anything other than he's not Trump, but he's not going to make me happy on any policy that he adopts. Biden is not free trade. The idea that the left is free trade is insane. And of course, Riley says, who knows what Biden will actually do? I agree. I have no idea what Biden will actually do. So, free trade, it's not really debatable. But the West is debating it, and it's coming out against it. Whereas China seems at least to be committed to it. They get it. So there's this competition within China between those who want more control, those who want less control, just like there is here. Although here I think everybody seems to want more control. I don't know who exactly wants less. And again, I want to emphasize that in China has moved dramatically over the last 40 years towards more economic freedom, and that is what has led to its wealth. There are more billionaires in China today than anywhere else in the world except the United States. And that's a measure of goodness, not of badness. So, and that's why I find it weird to call China communist. In communism, there are no billionaires. Socialism, there are no billionaires. But in fascism, they are. Fascism does not object to billionaires. So it's interesting. It's interesting. I don't know if you know this, but when Deng Xiaoping came into power in the late 70s, but then in the early 80s, one of his slogans that he actually put on billboards all over China was, "Let some people get rich." Well, they have. And his view was, you got to have some people lead the way in getting rich to bring everybody up with them. So he truly believed that, rising tide lifts all boats was something that Deng Xiaoping, a communist in his earlier years, and a really evil guy under Mao Zedong. He helped Mao do some of the most horrific things that Mao did, and yet made a real turn and was a huge force for good, some good, through a period in Chinese history. Although, again, he was also the evil bastard who sent the troops into Tiananmen Square. So very, very mixed guy. Very mixed guy. Okay, so that's about where the wealth comes from. That's about the Chinese economy. What about the idea that they're going to get bigger than us, richer than us, they're going to be more successful than us? Well, that can only happen under one scenario. The USSR, Carol says the USSR did something similar short-term with NEP. Never. The NEP allowed for a little bit of freedom, and nowhere near the kind of freedom that you're seeing in China, that you saw in China starting in the 1980s. So USSR did it on a much smaller, much narrower, much more limited scale. And as a consequence, it didn't generate anywhere close to the kind of wealth that it has in China, close to the kind of success that it's had in China. No, the USSR was far more committed to communism than China is over the last 40 years. And the NEP didn't last 40 years. It was shut down because they realized the consequence was so anti-communist. They shut it down. But it was on a much narrower, much smaller scale. I mean, in many respects, it's easier to do business in certain provinces in China than it is in the United States. There are less regulations. There's less taxes. There's less redistribution. So, no, I mean, China's gone way past anything the Soviet Union did during the NEP. Yes, I mean, what the NEP showed was that the communists were willing to compromise for a little bit. But China hasn't compromised for a little bit. It's completely changed the rules of the game. It's abandoned any semblance of communism other than one-party rule. But one-party rule is not unique to communism. It's unique to all authoritarianism. So the Chinese authorities today are much more, they're authoritarians with a fascist bent, not a socialist bent. So finally, this question about the China overtaking the United States in terms of size. There's only one way in which that can happen because, let's be clear, the United States is so much richer than China. It's got a much smaller population. We've got about a quarter of the population. And yet we're much richer. And for them to catch up, there's only one way that can happen. Because even today, we're accumulating wealth in many respects at a much faster rate than they are, even though their GDP is growing much faster than ours. And part of that is that we've already got this massive fixed base. But there's one way in which they could take it over, and that is if they became much freer than us. If they moved in the direction of free trade, if they moved in the direction of free markets, if they loosened the restrictions, if they sold off the state-owned enterprises, if they liberated their banking system, if they moved towards free markets. Remember, China, in spite of the elements of freedom that exist within it, in certain parts of it, in certain sectors, is ranked 127 on the World Freedom Index. If they moved to 20 on the World Freedom Index, World Economic Freedom Index, not political freedom, Economic Freedom Index, and we stayed where we are today in a sense of economic freedom, if we didn't improve, if we continued to deteriorate as we are today in terms of economic freedom, then China would go back to massive amounts of growth. It would create real wealth. The government would actually get out of the business of building so-called infrastructure and manipulating, controlling the economy. That's what it would mean to go to number 20 on the World Economic Index. I mean, the Chinese banking industry, finance industry, particularly banking, is completely state-run or state-controlled, would be better. It's not state-owned, but it's state-controlled. But imagine if they liberalized all that. Then yes, then they could become richer than us. But that would be a good thing, not a bad thing for them, certainly, but also for us. That is, economic competition is not harmful. Economic competition is beneficial. Their success is our success. As they become richer, they will buy more American goods. As they become richer, they will become more efficient producing goods for us. As they become richer, they will become better traders with us. What is the essence of trade? The essence of trade is win-win. The essence of trade is that both parties benefit. Well, if both parties benefit, as China becomes richer, we become richer. Maybe we become richer at a slower rate, but we still get richer. So if China becomes bigger than the United States because it becomes freer, then it also, I think, mitigates the military threat. It mitigates the property rights threat because a freer nation does not steal, doesn't work together. So it's to catch up. The only way for China to catch up is either for us to decline fast, and we're probably not going to decline fast, we're probably going to stagnate for a long time, or for them to grow dramatically, not just in raw GDP, kind of government manufactured GDP, but in real wealth, in real production, somewhat like they did in the 80s and 90s. You know, competition is great. So competition, in this sense, is trade, and therefore everybody's better off. So more freedom is good. More freedom in China is good for Americans. But what is actually going on in China? The fact is the Chinese are not, even as free as some sectors of the economy are, they're still unbelievably inefficient, unproductive, nowhere near kind of American levels of innovation, nowhere near American levels of value creation, nowhere near American levels of wealth creation through business. So even as our economy has declined, and their economy has supposedly grown dramatically, it is still true that by most measures, they're way behind the United States. There's a really good article that I recommend. China's economy is not overtaking America's. Just Google that, by Michael Beckley. They're just no way close. You know, one interesting stat, and this goes against the Trump, Biden, and what's his name? Doesn't matter. The left's arguments, Trump and the left's arguments that all the jobs left for China. The fact is that productivity in China is far lower than productivity in the United States. And that's because American workers are far more productive than Chinese. And part of that is just they're better workers. And our education is still better on average, although their best students are pretty good. And it's because we have better capital, better technology, better investment. Bernie Sanders is what I was thinking of. Thank you, Bernie. The fact is that when you take a good and you look at how much it costs to produce in China and how much it costs to produce in the United States, it's the same number. While Chinese labor is far cheaper, the reason they're cheaper is because they're less productive. Again, what has replaced American workers in America is automation. It's computers. It's robots. That has made the American workers in production more productive. More productive. And it's made the production of goods in the United States cheaper. Add to that the fact that Chinese do not have the management, the capital, the education, the quality labor that we do. And you get a situation where, yes, Chinese manufacture are the largest manufacturers in the world in terms of just dollars manufactured. But the United States is not that far behind. The United States manufactures more stuff today than ever before, even though it does it with a lot less workers. There's nothing to fear economically from China. There's nothing to fear economically from China. The accusation is they dump steel or whatever in the United States. Okay, so we get cheap steel at Chinese expense. That's great for us, but bad for them. Slows down their economic growth. Slows down them trying to achieve wealth. Militarily is a different question, which I'm not going to answer today. I think my view is My view is the Chinese military is decades behind the U.S. military in sophistication, in experience, in quality of weapon systems. U.S. weapon systems have been tested. They've been tested under fire, and they're the best by far in the world. I remember the days where people used to worry about Soviet weapon systems. Oh, so the Soviets had more tanks than we did. They had more airplanes. Everything was more. But then every time Israel would go to war with U.S. tools and Arab countries would go to war with Soviet tools, you could see within minutes the quality difference between those tools. So while the Chinese, I'm sure, are better than the Soviets, they're not tested, and it's hard to believe that they have anywhere close to the quality that we have militarily. They would be crushed by a U.S. willing to actually fight. So I don't think China's a military threat yet. The other area I read about this, there's an AI. The Chinese are considered leaders in AI. Again, overstated. If you look at the United States, if you look at the number of companies we have, if you look at the uses of AI, if you look at the innovation around AI in places like the U.S. and places like Israel, even in some parts of Europe, we're way ahead of them. If you look at biotech, we're way ahead of them in every area of these things. The United States, because of its freedom, one area is education. And I'm not talking about primary education. I'm talking about college education, primarily in sciences and engineering. I think the best university in China scores 90 in the world. In the top 100 universities in the world, the United States has 50. Tens of thousands of Chinese students come to the United States every year to study. Tens of thousands. They come from all over the world to study in American universities. I'm not talking about gender studies and English. I'm talking about studying science and engineering. Now, one of the great travesties is once they get their degrees, we send them back. We don't give them green cards. We don't encourage them to stay in the United States, which is a massive mistake by the United States. But the point is that we have a huge advantage when it comes to education, which we don't take advantage of. The bigger advantage we have is that people want to live in the U.S. So we have positive net migration of incredibly talented people into this country. All right. So, to summarize, the role of the state in the Chinese economy, way exaggerated. Freedom is what has led. Free markets, to the extent that they've happened, the extent that they've been allowed, are the source of wealth in China. The only way the Chinese economy can grow dramatically to the point of challenging the United States' dominance in the global economy is by increasing that economic freedom. And as that economic freedom increases, they will grow richer. That's great. We benefit from that. At current levels, at current paces, with the current systems, the Chinese being where they are, we are where we are, with all the problems we have, there's no way the Chinese are going to come close to the United States. China is fascist in the sense that it has an authoritarian government. But that authoritarian government has allowed certain sectors of their economy more freedom in some places than we allow sectors in our own economy. The difference is that we pretend at playing democracy and control business. They don't pretend at playing democracy. They have authoritarianism and they control businesses. In some areas, they control business much more than we do. They have state-owned businesses. We don't. State-owned enterprises. We don't. In some areas, they have fewer controls over businesses. Places like Guangzhou or Dongguan or Shenzhen in the south of China, there are less regulations than in the United States on most businesses. And the very wealthy are taxed at lower rates than they are in the United States. But they're authoritarian. And that's where the fascist label comes from. But they're not communist authoritarian because state-owned enterprises, while they might be big and they might be a big chunk in terms of assets of the economy, there's a big, huge section of the economy where basically, there is some freedom. I'm just going to respond to this comment, even though I shouldn't, because it's not a super chat comment. Cal says the dark ages can happen when knowledge is lost. I don't think so. This is my one source of optimism. I don't think so, because knowledge is so diffused today. The thing about the dark ages is knowledge was all concentrated in one place, basically Rome. And when Rome fell, all knowledge was lost. A few people had all the knowledge. Today, knowledge is diffused across millions, tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of people. Not only do they know the principles of engineering, of science, of physics, but even the knowledge of the great documents of history, the great literature of history is there. It's accessible. Yeah, there was a library in Alexandria. There wasn't a base of knowledge with architects and thinkers, and there was a library and some keepers of the library in Alexandria, but that doesn't count. And Constantinople turned into primarily a religious center rather than a center of real knowledge and real information. I mean, that knowledge diffused into the Islamic world, and indeed even during the Dark Ages, the world wasn't dark, the West was dark. Indeed, Islam prospered and thrived, and knowledge thrived under Islam during the European Dark Ages. See, even back then, it wasn't a real Dark Ages on a global scale, because Muslims discovered Greece and they thrived. And today, that globalization effect, that dispersion of knowledge, is even more substantial, dramatically more substantial, than it was under Rome at the end of the Roman Empire. So to the extent that civilization still survived because there was these pockets of libraries, pockets of knowledge, even back then, well, imagine what would happen today when the pockets of knowledge are pretty much everywhere. Anybody has access to them. So I don't think there's going to be a dark age. I think we're going to go through phases of great authoritarianism in different parts of the world, and maybe in the United States most tragically than anywhere else. But we're not going to see a global destruction of all knowledge in the name of equality. You'll see people experimenting in particular places around equality. The United States could go into dark ages. That doesn't mean the world goes into a dark ages. Europe could go to the dark ages. Doesn't mean that Asia will go into dark ages. So this is why, one of the many reasons I'm a huge proponent of globalization. The diffusion of knowledge, the diffusion of expertise, the diffusion of trade. Because who knows where the light of knowledge would stay, where the light of civilization will shine. Yeah, it's a big deal for the United States to go into dark ages, and we're fighting against that. Not many people are helping, though. All right, we're fighting against the dark age in the United States, but the optimist in me says, okay, but we live in a world in where you don't have to stay in the United States. You can go to where freedom is still around, where knowledge still exists, where civilization is still there. All right, let's go over these. What did Ayn Rand mean when she said every form of happiness is private? Well, I think that happiness is something that happens certainly in you, but it happens because of the way you think about your values and achieving them. So there are lots of people who have values and achieve the values and are not happy because of the conclusions they have about themselves, because of the conclusions they have about their values, because of the conclusions they have about achieving those values. So happiness comes from your dealing with your values, your choice of values, and then what you do when you attain those values, how you respond to the attaining of values, what you allow yourself to feel, and what you allow yourself, we'll talk about this on Tuesday, the pride. Pride is crucial to happiness. Maybe that's why it's a vice under Christianity. So, happiness from relationships, happiness that comes from sex, happiness that comes from attaining your values in any realm, from career, are things that you do with yourself. Are things that you can't really, you can share your happiness, but the cause of it, the experience of it is private. You can't share it in a deep sense. I think that's what you meant. Are Americans selfish emotionally and altruistic intellectually, or vice versa? For me, after I studied objectivism, intellectually, I knew selfishness was right, but emotionally, it took a while for me to shake the altruism. So, I think that the way to think about it is that Americans, and I think people, not just Americans, people generally, are altruistic in their ideal, in their moral framework, in their standards, but moderately, vaguely selfish, self-interested in their existential behavior and their actual behavior in the world out there. So, and you can't separate here emotionally and intellectually because both are confused, right? They're certainly altruistically emotionally. That's why they feel guilt. They're certainly altruistically intellectually because it expresses themselves in what they think the good is. Intellectually, they know the good is other people, helping other people. Sacrificing, that's the good. But there is a space there in terms of what they actually do in life. And then what they actually do in life, that's where you get an expression of, not fully, but an expression of non-altruistic behavior. I won't even call it selfish. Non-altruistic behavior. So in their practical life, they want to be happy. In their practical life, they want to be successful. In their practical life, they want the nice car. In their practical life, they want love. They want all the good things in their practical life. But the emotion of altruism and the intellectual ideas of altruism are constant tug against it. An constant, but are you sure? Is this right? Should you be happy because you got the promotion? It's a constant nudge at them to prevent them from fully benefiting from those practical aspirations. But they are torn and they live in guilt. And when you ask them, do you want to be happy? Oh yeah, I want to be happy. Do you think that happiness is your moral, ethical goal? Well, morality, I don't know. Morality, that's about sacrifice. Do you think Mother Teresa was a saint? Yes. She was miserable, by the way. That's okay, but she was still a saint because she helped other people. But it's very rare that anybody is an actual Mother Teresa. Because it's very rare that people are willing to existentially, in their action, in their practice, actually become the altruist that they know they should be. And that's the source of their huge amount of guilt. Huge amount of guilt. When does a society lose its ability to resist hatred? Well, why is hatred a bad thing? Why should a society, I'm not sure what a society resisting or not resisting hatred means, because a society is a collection of individuals, and society can't hate, individuals can hate. But I don't know what it even means to society lose its ability to resist hatred. I know what it would mean for individuals, but why should you resist hatred? I guess my view is that it's wrong to try to resist hatred. In a sense, what's important is to understand whether the hatred is justified or not. Is the hatred objective or not? Is the hatred rational or not? But there's nothing wrong with hatred. if something out there is anti-life, if something is out there is anti-your life, then you should hate it. Hate is very much a survival emotion. It tells you what is bad for you. It tells you what to avoid, what to stay away from. So I'm not, and I've said this, I think we talked about this on other shows, I'm not against hate at all. I'm against irrational hate, but I'm against irrational anything. But there's nothing wrong with the emotion of hatred. You don't want it to dominate you. You don't want it to be your primary motivator in life. You don't want it to, but it is an important emotion that you have to recognize, identify, just like any other emotion, put in its place, but recognize why it's there and what function it serves. And mainly it serves the function of a warning sign against dealing with certain people that are anti-life and anti-you. What are your thoughts on Dr. Michael Hood's work on integrating objectivism into modern psychology? I'm not familiar. I mean, I know Michael Hood. I obviously disagree with him quite a bit on politics, but I don't know what his views on integrating objectivism into modern psychology. Obviously, you have to be very careful when you integrate objectivism into modern psychology, because modern psychology is built on a foundation that's very non-objectivist. So you have to be careful there. I know the work of Gina Golan. I think Gina Golan does good work. Ed Locke has done good work. Others have done important work with regard to integrating psychology, objectivism. But I'm not familiar with that aspect of Michael Hood's. Again, I've been in real significant disagreement with him about political issues, certainly since 2016. All right, let's see. Will governors make COVID vaccine mandatory? If so, will it start a revolution? I don't know. I don't know that they will. I don't think they will. I think they make it mandatory for certain activities. They might make it mandatory for teachers. They might make it mandatory for kids. If they want to go to school, kids already get vaccinated for all kinds of things, which would be ridiculous, by the way, because kids are the last people you have to worry about with regard to COVID. I don't think they're going to make it mandatory across the board, particularly if enough people get vaccinated. And I think what you'll see is if you can get 10, 15, 20% of the American population vaccinated, I think that's going to have such dramatic impact on the numbers, particularly if you get people vaccinated who are most likely to go to the hospital, most likely to get sick and get a severe case of COVID. If they get vaccinated, then hospital capacity will improve, ICU capacity will improve, and generally caseload will go down significantly. That even if you don't get what epidemiologists call herd immunity, you're still going to get massive benefits just from vaccinating the most vulnerable. And I think people are going to see those benefits, and I think the urgency to get everybody vaccinated will go down. But look, I keep underestimating these people. I never thought we would be in a situation where we're locking down right now. I thought that over the summer, the states would get organized, that they would establish significant infrastructure of test, trace, isolate, that they would figure it out, and they would deploy the test, trace, isolate methodology across the board to avoid another lockdown. But they didn't. They sat on their hands the whole summer. This has been the pattern since January, that the government at every single level has sat on its hands, just waited, and then been responsive in a sense of just, I thought the FDA would approve those home tests so that we could all get tested all the time and you wouldn't need, in other words, I thought that at some level rationality would rule the day. It turns out it was all wishful thinking. Turns out I was way too optimistic. and that our politicians are even more dramatically incompetent than even I imagine. And again, doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, it's all the same. They're all incompetent. It's not like some states out there have a good methodology of testing, tracing, isolating. None of them do. And as a consequence, we're seeing massive increases in hospitalizations and ICUs and even deaths now. So it's a massive failure of the system, which in this case is a massive failure of government because government controls the system. It's a massive failure of our hospitals that there's a shortage in ICU beds. But that is a failure of government because governments limit what an ICU bed is, what it looks like, how it is, and how everything, all this is completely, utterly government controlled. So it's a massive failure of government. I don't think anybody's going to learn that lesson. I think the lesson is we need more socialized medicine. We need more government intervention in healthcare. But the fact is that that's exactly what it is. Trump's hold on the GOP is that he was the first to appeal only to emotion and not to reason. Yeah. Complete surrender to tribalism via emotion for power worship trumps facts and truth. Yes. Is this a postmodern view? Well, I don't know if it's postmodern because I think pre-postmodernism, this has been used effectively. It's been used effectively by authoritarians for generations. This methodology, this way of seeing it, the way of manipulating people, the way of encouraging tribalism and getting people riled up around this kind of agenda is not new. There's a certain intellectual strand of thought that is called postmodernism that takes these ideas and grounds them in a particular philosophy, pretty weak philosophy, pretty lame philosophy, but a philosophy nonetheless. But this train of ideas has been around for a long time. Authoritarians have had it. Pragmatism has been around for a long time. Tribalism has been around for a long time. The use of tribalism via emotion has been around for a long time. So I don't think that this is this is postmodernism on the right, because I don't think what motivates Trump is some postmodern ideology. I think what motivates Trump is pragmatism. Pragmatism at its all out. Now, is there a difference between pragmatism, pure pragmatism, and postmodernism in the view of truth? No, in the end there isn't. But pragmatism it comes earlier philosophically than postmodernism. Pragmatism, William James and the other pragmatist philosophers were late 19th century, early 20th century philosophers, whereas postmodernism is a phenomenon of the mid-20th century as an intellectual movement. So you can come to very similar conclusions based on very different philosophical ideas. And even though the conclusions about truth might be similar, the way they're applied and the way they manifest is very different. But yes, what we live in today is an era in which significant portions of both the right and the left don't believe in truth, don't believe in reality, don't believe in principles, and where everything is mushy and flexible. And it's why, in the end, Trump cannot be successful. He lost. It's because he doesn't have principles. And imagine a true authoritarian. It cannot be a pure pragmatist. A pure authoritarian cannot be a pure pragmatist. Now, pragmatism and being pragmatic are bad things. Being pragmatic is not a good thing. Being practical is good. The practical and the moral are what objectivism stand behind. Being pragmatic is by definition abandoning principle. That's what it means. And I know there's confusion when Americans talk about this. But what pragmatic means is abandoning principle. And Trump was the ultimate pragmatist. And he acted pragmatically. I mean, that's what he is. And unfortunately, many businessmen are pragmatists because the only principles they've been taught are the principles of altruism, which they reject. And they associate principles with altruism. And therefore, the only alternative they know is being pragmatic, which is abandoning principles. And unfortunately, many businessmen are pragmatic. Pragmatic and practical are not synonyms, are not synonyms. It is a massive mistake, intellectually, conceptually, to treat those two as synonyms. And certainly Ayn Rand would be horrified by that idea. Ayn Rand, whose concepts were important to her, definitions, words were important. And pragmatic is a very different concept than practical. What do you make of the Machiavellian ideas of government? Strikes me as very Marxist and zero-sum thinking. Well, again, why Marxist? I mean, Marxist is one intellectual strand of the left. Machiavellian ideas are zero-sum. But then most ideas out there that are not free market ideas, that are not Ayn Rand ideas, that do not understand the trader principle, are zero-sum. It's not Marxist. And indeed, Machiavelli is far before Marx, a long time before Marx. And Marx didn't argue about the kind of things that Machiavelli didn't give that kind of advice. He didn't get into the weeds of how rulers should rule. But remember, Machiavellian is unprincipled, targeted at power for the sake of power. And what do you do in order to gain power and keep power? And morality's out and principle's out. Why? Because morality is altruistic, and you can't get power if you're going to be an altruist. And you can't maintain power if you're going to be an altruist. So if the only morality is altruism, then you have to throw altruism out, which means you have to throw principles out. And now you just have to function on the principle of what? A power. That's what Machiavellianism is. It applies to every ruler, every dictator, every authoritarian, Marxist or not. Anyway, I think you said once that if a person is not using reason, then tribalism is an animalistic default reaction. Can you elaborate? Yeah. If you're not using reason, then you cannot discover truth. You cannot discover the practical, what works, what is leading and lead to success, because that is only discoverable through reason. So you're adrift. And when you adrift to knowledge, when you adrift to the truth, the emotion that will dominate you is fear, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how you're going to deal with it. So you're grasping at anything because truth is not accessible to you. And you're motivated by fear. Where do you find comfort? How do you find comfort? Well, the world is unintelligible. And to anybody who the world is unintelligible to, the world becomes physical. It's a physical threat to you. Well, what is the way to defend yourself against any kind of threat, physical or otherwise, when you can't have reason? Well, it's a group, because you as an individual are weak. The only way you can deal with the world is to join a group. You can see this in gang behavior. The gang is more powerful. So the gang, the group, the tribe, gives you emotional sustenance. It gives you emotional support. It encourages you not to be fearful. There is strength in numbers, we are told. And you learn the truth. You don't have to now rely on your own reason, because the group will tell you what is true and what is not. So what people who abandon reason tend to do is replace it with the tribe. In other words, replace it with emotion, but because they don't trust their emotion enough, they replace it with other people's emotions. And all of the groups need leaders. Tribes need leaders. Because what does the tribe know? How does the tribe act? It needs to be guided. And so ultimately that leads to authoritarianism. The tribe needs a leader to tell it what the truth is, and then it communicates with the rest of the tribe, primarily via emotion, to communicate what the truth is. And you can see it right now. Trump communicates what the party line is, and then all the minions repeat. And it's at every level where people are repeating mindlessly things that they've heard and they don't know because it came from the right source. And the right source is the source approved by the leader, the tribe, and so on. Where do you draw the line between mixed regulated economy and fascism? I mean, fascism involves authoritarianism, I think. I think fascism, so I think the United States is basically on the way to fascism. So it's more fascist than anything else. But it's not quite there because it still has nominally a non-authoritarian government. But the line is not always a clear line. The line is very vague. It's somewhere when we tilt towards authoritarianism and where there's even less economic freedom than there is today. We're not quite at fascism. We're still at a mixed regulated economy, but we're moving in that direction. That's my sense. And the loss of political freedom is part of that. Now, in China, you've got no political freedom, but you've got probably more economic freedom than you do in the U.S., in at least, again, in some parts of it, some parts of the economy. So I think China is closer to fascism than the United States is. All right. Sorry, missed the start of the show. Can you discuss Chinese government creating growth by building huge amounts of infrastructure resulting in ghost cities, excess airports, etc.? Seems to have worked. No. All those ghost cities have done is reduced growth, reduced real growth. What they've done is they increased GDP. But GDP is not real economic growth. GDP is not wealth creation. GDP is just GDP. It's gross domestic product, which is a large extent, a large factor in GDP is government spending. So government borrows a huge amount of money and spends a huge amount of money. GDP goes up. For example, in the first year of World War II, GDP in the United States grew at 12%. Now that's stunning because quality of life went down, standard of living went down, wealth creation went down, everything went down, but GDP went up. Why? Because the government was spending more than ever on tanks. And that counts for GDP. But did the economy grow because of World War II? No, the economy shrunk because of World War II. Did the Chinese economy grow because of building huge amounts of infrastructure? No, the economy shrunk because those things were being built. It grew elsewhere faster than it was shrinking through. So net, it grew. And the huge infrastructures raise GDP because they're massive government spending, and that counts towards GDP. But they actually helped cripple aspects of the Chinese economy. Now, certain infrastructure projects, like building roads, probably helps the economy because it allows for better transportation and better logistics. But just building ghost cities and ghost skyscrapers, that is a net loss on the economy. And the best explanation of that, in a slightly different context, is the broken window fallacy, which you can read in the best introductory book to economics that I know of, called Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. Spending money, even to build things, does not equate to economic growth. If the things you build are worth less than the money you spent, then it's economic destruction. And China is engaged in trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of economic destruction. Luckily for China, in certain sectors, it has also created massive amounts of wealth. Okay, sorry, Mr. Oh, I just did that. All right. How does the Chinese government manipulate its currency? What is the U.S.'s issue with them doing this? Well, I mean, the fact is that the Chinese government manipulates its currency in the same way that the American government manipulates its currency. And let's be very clear. There is not a government on the face of planet Earth that does not manipulate its currency. The only way to have a currency that is not manipulated by government is to go on a gold standard. It's to privatize the banking system, to let banks issue currency, to privatize currency. There are lots of ways to privatize currency. But the only way is to privatize currency. As long as currency is a function of the state, it will be manipulated. And the Chinese government does not manipulate its currency any differently than the American government does. How does it do it? By setting interest rates and by determining the amount of money in the economy through, whether it's through massive QE, quantitative easing, which the Chinese and the American government both engage in, or whether it's through physical, what they call physical stimulus in quotes, which is government spending, which both the Chinese and the U.S. government are very good at. And that's how you manipulate your currency. Now, the Chinese can also peg their currency, theoretically, right? They peg it. They say Chinese yuan will only be within this range relative to the dollar. But they can only peg it if they do the things in the background to justify this pegging. Because otherwise, market would swamp them and cause the peg to disappear. So in other words, the whole idea that the Chinese government manipulates its currency is bogus. If that suggests that there's something ominous going on here that nobody else does. Every government on planet Earth manipulates its currency. We don't like it, or some people in America don't like it. When the Chinese government does things to keep its currency value low. So if the dollar is very high and the renminbi, the Chinese currency is very low, the dollars can buy lots of Chinese goods. And then exports flourish. And the Chinese like exports. If the renminbi is very high relative to the dollar, then the Americans will buy fewer things from China. Again, all else held equal. So the theory is, it's not a good theory and it doesn't really work in real world because reality is much more complicated than these two measures, is that the Chinese keep their currency really, really cheap so that we will buy a lot of stuff from them, and it's one way in which they subsidize export. But that's just untrue. It's just, for the most part, it has been over the last 10 years untrue. Indeed, there is a strong argument to be made that if the Chinese actually left their currency alone, that the value of currency would rise and the value of the dollar would go down, thus reducing exports to the United States. And the Chinese, other way around, that the currency would go, if they let it float, it would actually go down. It would go down more than it is right now, increasing exports to the United States based on the old theory. But none of that is so. Let me say it this way. 90% of what you hear without, and I can do a whole class on this, but 90% of what you hear about China and its currency and manipulating and why it helps them and hurts the United States and why the United States should consider China a currency manipulator but not the Federal Reserve is wrong. Just wrong. And it doesn't matter if it comes out of the mouth of a Republican or Democrat. It's still wrong. Most of the time, the commentators get the direction of what is happening wrong. They're so ignorant of the economics. They don't even know what exactly is happening. So if China, for most of the last 10 years, just let go of its currency, it's likely it would have dropped in value. So what China's actually been doing is propping it up. When for all these years, we've heard from people saying, oh, no, China's driving their currency down. Exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite of the truth. So Nothing wrong with China manipulating its currencies that you cannot say about the United States. Ideally, no country would manipulate any currency because currencies would be market-based and governments could not manipulate them. And until that happens, currencies will be manipulated. And if you think the central planners in Beijing or the central planners at the Federal Reserve know what they're doing when they're manipulating their currencies and are doing it for the common good and the public interest, then I've got some land off the coast of Florida to sell you. Because you're delusional, because central planners don't know what they're doing. Chinese central planners are no better than American central planners. None of them know what they're doing. 90% of the time they're going in the exact opposite direction of what they thought they were going. All right, let's do these things quickly. What do you think of British-American writer Christopher Hitchens' work? Christopher Hitchens, yeah, he died, right? He's the brother who died. I mean, I liked some of it and I disliked others. I mean, he was a real socialist back in the 1980s and very, very, very bad. He seems to have had some kind of awakening in 2001 after 9/11. His work got decidedly better. And, he did good work on foreign policy, good work in Islam. He did good work on atheism. He became more pro-capitalist, although he was never capitalist and never really pro-capitalist. But he abandoned much of his kind of true socialist ideas. So I liked the post-9/11 work of Christopher Hitchens. And he certainly was smart, but he was very antagonistic to Ayn Rand. Very, very, devoted time to putting her down and not taking her seriously. He viewed her as a threat. And in a number of his lectures, he talks about Ayn Rand. I'll give him credit for that. At least he talked about it. Walter Williams recently passed. Did you like him? I devoted a section of my show last time to Walter Williams. Yes, I did like him. Generally, I disagreed with him on certain things, like Trump, but on other things as well. But mostly, I liked him a lot. I met him. I had dinner with him once. Yeah, I mean, one of the giants in the field of economics of the last 50 years. And it's truly tragic that we've lost him. Guilt is almost as powerful as physical force in terms of its ability to make you act in ways you don't want to. Yes, but it's completely susceptible to free will. That is, you can't overcome guilt. You can't overcome force other than with force. So I don't like that I don't like to lump the two together. Guilt is a hugely powerful emotion and a hugely destructive way to motivate people to act. Yeah, Christopher Hitchens participated in a debate on capitalism versus socialism with Harry Binswang and John Ridpath in 1984, I think. And it's a great debate. You should watch it. And Hitchens was pathetic. It was really bad in the debate. I think he improved a lot into 2000s. But again, he was not a powerhouse. He was articulate. He was interesting sometimes. But he missed it on a lot of different things. Why do Yankees fans and Red Sox fans hate each other so much? Because they're rivals. Because you picked a team. And for your team to win, the other team has to lose. It's zero sum. It's like politics. You can't both win. And the Red Sox and the Yankees have been 1-2 in the Eastern Conference over and over and over again. And it's very, very, very competitive. And over many decades, it's one or the other. And because they get so dedicated to their team, they hate the other. Because the other stands in the way. It's zero sum. Only one can win. It's the exact opposite of economics, where it is essentially win-win. And again, people enjoy the tribal aspect of it. There's a certain emotional satisfaction. And you can feel it when you go to a rock concert, when you can go to a baseball game or any sports game. To be with a big group of people who all support, who all share your values is very emotionally satisfying. Is altruism ultimately nihilistic? If so, is it still nihilism if an altruist sacrifices for an egoist? Yes, I think altruism is ultimately nihilistic. I think that if the more you take it seriously, the more it's about the hatred of all values, of all good, primarily your own life, your own good. So, yeah, I think it is. Is it still nihilism if an altruist sacrifices for an egoist? Yeah, because his motivation. It's about his motivation. And again, the nihilism is about his own life, not a nihilism, some kind of external nihilism. It's he hates his life. He's destroying his life. Inability to separate reason from emotion is at all times high. Left and right antagonize each other so badly it ends with they losing their heads. Yes, it's stunning how reason is out, emotion rules the day on both sides. It's truly, I never thought it would be this bad in America. Is it psychologizing to view Jordan Peterson's struggles as connected to his taking seriously the view that life is suffering? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. And, you would have to make a case for how the two are connected. But I think the two are probably connected. They have something to do with the way he deals with his own struggles that makes them worse, with his own suffering that maybe makes it worse. But I don't think it's psychologizing. You're not trying to attribute a psychological motivation. You're just saying psychology has an impact in life, and it absolutely does. And life, your views, your intellectual views, have an impact on your psychology. It goes in all directions. What do you think about a digital dollar and the phasing out of physical dollars and private banks besides the Fed? I mean, I think it's very dangerous. I think the more we move towards more digital, and which I like, right? I like the convenience of not having currency, of not having cash. But cash is the one place that gives you privacy. Nobody knows how you spend your cash. But all digital transactions are registered. You cannot escape digital transactions. That's why government wants it. So unfortunately, it's not about efficiency. It's about control. And that's what scares me. Do you think we're currently in a major crisis? And if so, what is the chance of positive social transformation? For instance, the formation of a blockchain-based internet. I do think we're in a major crisis. I think the crisis will be long-lasting. I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. I don't know about positive social transformation. The forces of positive social transformation do not seem to be strong. There seem to be a lot of forces for negative social transformation, left and right. I don't see many for positive social transformation. A blockchain-based internet, I don't know. I don't know enough about the tech, but I do think that there is a chance that a blockchain-based internet will evolve. And I think that'll be our solution to the issue of privacy. And that'll be a huge step forward. And I know people are working on it, and we'll see how far they get and how far they're allowed to get, because there's certain people in this world who do not want us to have privacy. But I don't know that that's going to come out of the major crisis. I just think it's something people have been working on for the last 10 years, and I think we'll continue to work on, and hopefully we'll start seeing real results in the decade to come. That is my hope. I think it would be a major positive. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining. Again, we'll probably have a show tomorrow, Monday. We'll definitely have a show Tuesday. That'll be the show on Pride. We've got 2 matches for the show on Pride. One for 250 likes will generate $1,000 match. Not a match, it's $1,000 grant, if you will, contribution. And $1,000 raise will raise, so dollar for dollar match, and every dollar up to $1,000. So thank you to all of those who contributed today during using the Super Chat. I hope some of you have saved up money so you can come on Tuesday and get us to $1,000 quickly. Don't forget to encourage your friends, to encourage everybody to come on, and you come on live on Tuesday so we can get to 250 likes during the show. I might have to go for 2, 3, 4 hours so we can get to the 250 likes. It might take a long time, but if you come, I will show up, and we will go as long as it takes. El Biero asks, what is the objectivist point of view on the law and economic school of thought? Should the efficiency of laws play a role in how we define property rights? No, not purely efficiency. But efficiency plays a role in what property rights are. But that is a complex question. Objectivists reject the view of law and economics. Law and economics is the view that law should be guided by economics. And that property rights should be determined by economics. And while economics is a factor, it is not a determining factor. So law and economics tends to be pragmatic. It tends not to view property rights as absolute, and it tends not to view principles as absolute and freedom as absolute. So I think all of law needs to come from the principle of the right to life. And property rights needs to be, first of all, needs to be understood. What do we mean by the right to property? What property rights actually mean? And then the laws need to be, in a sense, applications of that. What do you call it? That are better understood with knowledge of economics, but not that the economics drive kind of pragmatically in a utilitarian way the decisions of a court. The court should not be making decisions based on utilitarianism, which is basically what law and economics strive towards. David, thank you. I appreciate it. All right. See you guys all tomorrow. And if not tomorrow, then